Hello. In this video, we're going to be looking at a family simulation I ran for a Japanese history class. So again, this was upper level students mostly. One section was honors students. It was a very engaged class. It was a class that was, in many ways, if you look at the student participation, was very good. People took it seriously. So this was kind of an ideal class for running a simulation. And I tried to do an experiment where I ran a simulation that actually covered multiple class sessions. So there was more record keeping. And the idea was that I wanted them to experience what a Japanese family would have experienced from the years 1926 to 1954, basically right before militarization to militarization, the invasion of China, World War II, occupation, and then a little bit on the economic recovery, but not a whole lot. And so I divided it into sections. In the first round, we covered from 1926 to 1932. So this was very ambitious, but I had a good group of people to try it out with. So people had character cards, similar to what we've seen before. And I actually named them after a couple people who really were. They read a story written by this man named Takashi Nagai and his wife Midori. So for fun, I included the actual pictures of the people there. Usually I'm not able to do that. But again, we had some quirks. Now, they had children, and the children had quirks. The parents didn't, because the students played the parents, and I wanted them to kind of figure out their own quirks as they wanted to. But the students had quirks. Like one of the boys liked to make things and take things apart. One of the girls liked to write, and the idea was to make them more human, and so you care more about them. Each one made a happiness contribution, and they also made an economic contribution. And this is something I kind of struggled with. One thing about simulations is you're trying to simulate a different part of history that maybe had different values and a different kind of social organization. And men and women performed different roles, particularly in Japan in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and into the 50s. And I wanted to capture that. But I also wanted to make it kind of fair. In a sense, I didn't want to say, okay, the men do more than the women, but they need to do it differently, if that makes sense. So I had to figure out a way to, and especially Japanese understandings of family were complementary, that men had a certain role, women had another role. So what I did was I came up with two resources: just raw economic contribution, which is just your ability to bring in food, and then what I called, and you can see Takeshi gives more. He had an 8. Midori, she has less. She only has a 6. However, Midori contributes more happiness, and Takeshi contributes less. And the idea is that by having a wife or mother in the home, taking care of the household, making sure that the meals are well cooked and taken care of, making sure that the house is clean, making sure that there's food, making desserts and things like that, that increases overall happiness. And the idea here is to say this is valuable. Women's work and men's work are both equally valuable. Notice that they both add up to 10, right? 8 plus 2 for Takeshi, 6 plus 4 for Midori. But their contributions are different. And based on how Japanese nuclear families or extended families, because you could have a grandma in the simulation, worked, that makes sense, right? That makes sense. And students responded well to it. I just explained it. I said, this maybe isn't how we think things should work today. I'm not trying to make any kind of value judgment about this, but this is how things worked in Japan in this time period, right? And the key thing too, and we'll talk more about this, happiness was also very important, and it kind of fed back into economic contribution. There was also karma, and sometimes this basically represented luck, but again, I want it to be from a Japanese perspective. Luck's not as important. The idea is more important is karma, like I had good karma or bad karma from my past lives or because I did something wrong. And the number there, all these numbers, the economic contribution and the karma all represent number of dice you roll. Happiness was points, so it's a little bit different. It's not dice. Food needed, that's how many successes you need to have enough food to eat. So Takeshi needs 3, Midori needs 2. Notice that Midori basically breaks even because she gets to roll... You'll notice that on average, Takeshi and Midori should be able to produce more food than they need to actually eat themselves, and they need to do that to feed their children, right? Because you have like a 50% chance of success. So on average, Takeshi will get 4, Midori will get 3, And so they'll produce each 1 or 2 extra food for their kids, and their kids also make an economic contribution as well. Health modifier, you roll this many dice during health checks. If a character's health modifier goes to 0, that character dies. Didn't lose too many people, and I think I made this a little bit too easy. Of course, I didn't really also want to kill the parents because those are the individual players, and it's harder to replace a player. So I gave them a family record card, and so they had different statistics. So they had a family reputation, basically how much people respected them. On a hunger check, they could spend a point to change 1 failure into a success. So basically that was meant to represent like, hey, you ask your neighbor for some food and they respect you, so they give you some food. But you can only bother your neighbor so many times, right? You can't infinitely ask them for food, so you lose a point. There was also food storage. So the idea was that you could store grain so that you could, if you had a good year, the next year you have a bad year, you could eat some of that old grain that you had stored. There was savings also. So on a hunger check, people could spend a point from their savings to change a failure into a success. And the idea, you may say, why do you have all these different numbers? It's because I could change things. So for example, for savings, I could say, okay, food prices have gone up, so now it costs 2 points in order to buy something. Or I could say now it's going to, your family reputation has gone down. And the idea is you could be rich but have a terrible reputation. You could have a good reputation but be poor. So that's why I have all these different things. Total happiness, to calculate this number, add up the happiness contribution of all members of the family and any modifiers. Total economic contribution by males. So the idea here, and I did the math for people at first because they started off with several children. And just to make it simple, I said, okay, Takeshi, you roll for the boys. Midori, you roll for the girls. And that just kind of divided it up, and it made it easier. And it kind of fits into our theme that this is a very gendered time period. Then we have total economic contribution by females. Midori rolls that. And then the food consumption. The idea was that students could write on this card to kind of keep track of things, right? Because sometimes someone gets sick. Sometimes there was a bonus from a card, and they could change all this. And I have to say, I completely underestimated the amount of paperwork this game involved. It involved a lot. People had to write a lot. They were constantly getting confused because of all the numbers. And I tried to make the game just a little too crunchy. And what I ended up doing for later rounds, I actually made a spreadsheet and I printed it out. And you can see like it made things a little easier. It gave the statistics. And it said total successes during hunger checks, so I could write that down. Total successes minus food consumption, and then I've got that up there so I can figure that out. If total successes minus food consumption is positive, you can purchase item, put food storage, or add to savings. Total success food consumption is negative, you must spend points for family, reputation, food storage, or savings. And this actually solved a lot of those problems. If I was going to do this simulation again, I would maybe try and figure out a way to do it with counters. That could be very complicated. This is maybe easier than the counters. I'm not sure. But the idea was that then they could just write down everything on the next round. It's something I'll have to think more about, right? You play test things, you see what works, you see what doesn't. This is where counters are helpful. This is where boards are helpful. I did not have a board for this simulation. It was just cards and paper. And people suggested I think about using counters or boards. So basically what happened was we had a multiple choice question always for each round. If they get it right, they get to add a reputation. Then students drew a card. There was an event. Then they checked happiness. Then they made a hunger check. And I'll talk more about the happiness check, why that's important. And then they could either save money or spend money. These are examples of cards. I tried to make it connect to the people. So Takeshi gets caught cheating at cards. He was one of the, that's the man, the husband. He maybe gamble, subtract 1. Midori talked too much to a man not related to her, subtract 1 from family reputation. The idea is to capture the feeling, the atmosphere. Akira took apart a friend's toy. You can see I made a mistake. Could not put it back together again. Subtract 1 from family reputation. And these are old style cards. You'll notice there's no pictures. There was just too many different cards. And it's really difficult with the old way I did it to fix them. So sometimes I would just physically go back and draw like a C on there to get rid of the D. Junji was caught drawing a rude picture of the school principal on the wall of the school, subtract 1 from family reputation. So you can see they have the same resource impact, these particular cards, but that they had a different family member doing it. It was just meant to be fun, and students, it was meant to be like, oh, Junji just at it again. And just so you know, the characters, a lot of the names, like Akira is from the Akira manga. Junji is a reference to Junji Ito, who's a horror artist, and that's why he was good at drawing. But that's the kind of thing cards did. The next event was to resolve an event. That was the next step after they drew a card. So you usually give people like an easy event. This was the very first one in the simulation. But I said, make a karma check to see if you have good luck this year. For each success above 3, you gain +1 success during the hunger check. For each success below 3, you lose 1 success during the hunger check. And then the next year, I said, agricultural prices tumble, only 5s and 6 count as successes for the hunger check. So these are examples of checks where there was no decision. It just has an impact on the mechanics. You're still just rolling dice. I wanted to keep things simple the first couple rounds. But then after that hard year, we had Akiko, one of your daughters, wants to go to middle school, and you had to make a choice. Allowing her to go will cost 1 from savings, and she will only provide 1d6 for the hunger check for the rest of today's class. However, her happiness contribution will go up to 5. If Kiko's not allowed to go, she will only provide 1 happiness for the rest of today's class. So you had to make a choice, right? Do we let her go and lose her economic contribution, at least part of it, or do we let her do we make her not go and then she's mad at us, right? So that's something you have to kind of decide on. And the idea is to show, sometimes I wanted people to understand why farmers maybe wouldn't send their children to school. And this was a theme in our class. The idea here, since we have time passing, we could have people, children could get older and marry. So we had a karma check to see how marriage negotiations go. And this could affect, if they go really well, it could raise your reputation. If it didn't go so well, things could be bad. But then what would happen is Akira would, to simulate just kind of because you're a large farming family, the wife would move into your home. And so now she makes a happiness contribution. She makes an economic contribution. And I gave them a bonus happiness for the turn she moves in. And then I had a rule because it was possible for Akira to die before he gets married in this. And I said, well, if Akira is dead, then his girlfriend, she shows up and says, Akira made a promise to marry me. By the way, I'm pregnant with his child. And so you have to decide, do you let this woman with with what she says is your son's child, do you let her move in? Or in which case you have to feed her and the child? Or do you refuse and you lose 5 reputation and 1 karma, right? That's something you have to decide on, right? And I had to remind her, if you let her move in, be sure to add her contributions. And I had baby cards, like people had babies, which I always enjoy. I like the baby cards; they're fun. And it's funny, students complain. They're like, "Oh, these parasites." What are you talking about? Babies are cute; they're great. The baby card actually had the quirk, very cute. But then she gives birth to a baby, and now you got to take care of the baby. If Akira was still alive. There was also he could be called up to serve in the military, and when he's gone, they lose happiness, and soldiers provide no economic contribution, but you no longer have to feed them. Now they would have sent some money home. I just was trying to make things a little bit harder, and this is one of the things about the balance. Like I made the simulation too easy. I wanted people to feel the grind, and I just had too many things that could help them. But the idea here is that when you have this kind of multi-round simulation, you can have these events where the people develop. And I wanted people to experience what it was like to be a Japanese family and see your children going off to war. So I had another event where Atsuko and Hiroshi are called up to work in a factory. So you lose their economic and happiness contribution, but at least you don't have to feed them. So the idea was that I was able to create events that could make people happy. But as the war went on, I had more and more of these negative events that could cause people problems. And of course, they go to work in a factory, and I said, okay, Japanese factories are being bombed, and Atsuko and Hiroshi's factory is a target. So your children could be blown up by the bomb. And people had to make, basically, I had people make a karma check for Atsuko and Midori, and then you add their health modifier. So it's the idea, it's a combination of luck and how strong they are to see what happens to them. And basically, there was different things. If you have enough successes, your child is safe. If you have only a few successes, they're wounded, and they are able to contribute as much. And you could actually have them so terribly wounded that they require constant care. So they're basically completely disabled. So you take care of them. They no longer make an economic contribution. And then it was also possible for them just to die. And then you lose a permanent happiness modifier because, your child was killed in this way. So there was all these different events, and it's easy to think of various events you could have.